Dan, I read your note this morning. So you call this a Picasso-like quarter for Apple. What do you mean?
I mean, really, as a bull, you slept well last night because on the iPhone side, I'd say 57 million was sort of the bogey. The 61 million, crushed on the iPhone side.
Bam, yeah.
China, the jet fuel, which was 29% of revenue, that was really huge to the next few quarters in terms of that China thesis.
Right.
And then on capital allocation, in terms of dividend and buyback, Whisper was about 150 billion, where the street wanted. They came in at 200 billion. So really across the board
Well,
is
what do you
bull.
expect, though, Dan? I mean, they have, what, like $190 billion in cash?
I mean, at this point, they could really buy a country if they wanted to, given their cash.
A few, yeah.
But finally, investors are starting to see what they wanted in terms of at least some more acquisitions, buybacks, dividends.
Right.
And that iPhone cycle, it really has legs. And I think this is one where you take a step back. As much as the stocks had a run, it's 10 times X cash next year's numbers. And I think this is one where when you start to look at China, Watch, Apple Pay, we're still in the third inning of this growth story playing out.
Well, you mentioned iPhones in China and 29% of revenue. I mean, where can Apple get that to?
We ultimately believe 2 years from now, it's 35–40% of revenue is China. And China at this point, that's
40%. Wait, just for people to think about that. 40% of the revenue of Apple could come from China.
China is front and center. If you go to Apple's headquarters right now, I mean, that is the key focus in terms of not just on iPhones, but you look at the bigger iPads, you look at watches, bigger screens, which is really resonating in the Chinese market. That's something I think has been underestimated by the street based on our analysis. I think this is one. This is going to
Well, because I think the street kind of saw that as a market that was hard to penetrate, right? I mean, you have established players there. And it wasn't really until, I think, the partnership with China Mobile and others that where, then it started to kind of wake people up.
Well, that was key.
Yeah?
And then the larger screens on iPhone.
The larger screens,
I mean, that's really been significant. But the bears were saying, similar to you, that wasn't going to happen. China was being overhyped. And last night, they really hit that bear argument, along with the other was on that dividend, the buyback.
Yeah.
I think there's just the start of things to come. I see them more aggressive on M&A. And then Apple Watch, demand stronger than supply. We believe 2 million was the pre-sales number.
Yeah.
Now supply starts to get on track, and that's going to be a whole other
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a whole other opportunity. It might not move the needle that much, but at least it's, hey, if it does well, hey, that's another halo around Apple. But Dan, the one vulnerability, I guess you could say, is the iPad, right? I mean, that was like down 23%.
Yeah, and our view is that going to the developer conference in June, they're going to announce a larger iPad, a larger screen. We're going to have an iPad refresh cycle, which goes into the enterprise. Also, we see that successful in China. So I think there's a natural attrition ahead of the next iPad product cycle that we see in the next few months. And that was weakness. But the good thing is when Tim Cook's flying the plane, you feel really good getting on that plane, just given these are the product cycles they're looking at, and that's probably the next, what I view as the next sort of product cycle that we see.
All right, Dan, good to see you.
Great
Thanks so much, Dan Ives of FBR Capital Markets. I mentioned an outperform rating. 185 is your price target, right?
185, and we could see a 2 in front of that as the stock price of China and wearables continues to blossom.